All right. Hi, guys. I'm Robin Harris. I'm a master naturalist from the foothills. Started with the group when it first began, really. And I had just moved here from Texas. So I've gotten to know Arkansas really quickly because of this group. I've learned a lot. And at first it seemed like I wasn't really picking up a lot, but over time I look back and I've learned a tremendous amount. And I live on the banks of the tailwaters of the Little Red River, which is why my love of rivers started, really. Well, actually, it began back when I was camping with my dad as a kid. He would get us up before the crack of dawn, and we'd tiptoe out to the river, and we'd fish for trout up in Northern California. And one of the family jokes is he cast his line out in the water along with his entire rod and reel. So the joke of the family is, "Why'd you do that, Dad?" But he recovered, and I think we caught fish here and there, so that was fine. But because rivers, to me, are the lifeblood of the world. They act as major arteries in commerce and major zones of cooperation and sometimes vicious geopolitical dispute. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. I'll talk to you a little bit about the big picture of rivers and then kind of hone it down to the Mississippi-Missouri River Basin, and then finally to the Arkansas River. We'll go over some of the history, historical events that have happened with rivers through time. Let's see here. There we go. So the earliest civilization began in the Fertile Crescent, which is right here, and it's between the Euphrates, which is along this line here, and the Tigris, which is up here at the top. And over here is the River Nile. And it was the birth of some of the very first Neolithic agricultural communities. It is in this region, which is somewhere now in Iraq, that the Garden of Eden is rumored to have been located. So, and this is Mesopotamia, which means between two rivers, which is, I think, pretty interesting. But the first foundations of civil law were first devised here. So rivers had some impact because trade by waterway began here by riverboat, and most of the goods that we trade today are shipped by sea. So we continue with that tradition. Let's see here. So let me play this video for you. It's about 3 minutes long, but it talks about Earth's water, and I just love it. I think you'll like it too, so here goes. And Margaret, ping me if you can't hear the sound. Let's see. There we go.
Water is the fundamental ingredient for life on Earth. Looking at our Earth from space, with its vast and deep ocean, it appears as though there is an abundance of water for our use. However, only a small portion of Earth's water is accessible for our needs. How much fresh water exists and where it is stored affects us all. Nearly 2/3 of this fresh water is stored in the polar ice caps, snowpacks, and glaciers, making it inaccessible for long periods of time. The water cycle is dynamic. It describes the continuous movement of water on, above, and below the surface of the Earth, and the transitions from one state to another. Sea surface temperature, surface winds, and air temperature influence the rate of evaporation at the ocean surface. In the tropics, warm ocean surface temperatures support high rates of evaporation. Wind also increases evaporation. When the air's temperature is warmer, it can hold more water. While the atmosphere does not store a large quantity of water compared to the ocean, rivers, and lakes, it can transport water quickly from one place to another. Low-lying regions of the atmosphere with high moisture and strong winds can form atmospheric rivers to transport water horizontally. Clouds are formed as water vapor cools and condenses into droplets and ice crystals. Clouds and water vapor act as insulators in the atmosphere. Clouds help shield the Earth from the sun and trap heat from below. When cloud particles grow large enough, they may fall out as rain or snow. Under the right conditions, areas of precipitation can grow into large storms. As storms grow, they transfer heat vertically into the upper atmosphere. The migration of storms helps to distribute heat between the equator and poles, shaping wind patterns globally. How storms grow and intensify depends on atmospheric moisture, surface temperatures, and wind patterns. Precipitation is concentrated in some parts of the world and scarce in others. It can vary substantially from season to season and from year to year. Water that falls on the land surface as precipitation is stored within snowpacks, lakes, reservoirs, soils, and underground aquifers. Water availability varies from place to place and over time. The availability of water affects the type and abundance of vegetation, the primary source of food for animals and people. Extreme water cycle variability, unusually dry or wet conditions, impacts humans worldwide. Each year, hazards such as floods exact a costly economic and human toll. Most of the water that falls onto land remains stored there for weeks or more. Snowfall is stored as snowpack or ice. Meltwater and rainfall are stored in lakes and soils. Some of the water is absorbed by plant roots or drains into the water table. Eventually, the water will evaporate to the atmosphere or return to the ocean in streams and rivers, providing a source of nutrient-rich water that supports ocean life. Sensors on a suite of NASA satellites observe and measure water on land, in the ocean, and in the atmosphere. These measurements are important to understanding the availability and distribution of Earth's water, which is both vital to life and vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and a growing world population.
All right. Pretty cool, huh? Let's see here if I can advance it. All right, so the largest dot here represents all the water on, in, and above the Earth. And this smaller dot represents the fresh water on Earth. And this little bitty tiny little speck of a dot is the water in rivers and lakes. So that gives you a little perspective about water that we take for granted many times. The longest river in the world is the Nile. It runs along here through Egypt all the way down to Lake Victoria. 95% of Egypt's population lives along the Nile. It runs through the Sahara Desert, and there's an oasis on both sides of it, which is probably really beautiful. I've not seen too many pictures of it, but I'd love to go there and check it out. It travels through a lot of countries, and it's often the single source of water. It originates from two different rivers, the White and the Blue Nile, although some say it originates from Lake Victoria. This river, to me, is a little more unusual because it runs from the south to the north. And of course, we just talked about the Fertile Crescent here. The second longest river is the Amazon, which carries 20% of Earth's fresh water. It's a huge basin that covers much of South America. And you can see its relationship to the globe right down here. It's 3 million square miles for the basin. The third is the Yangtze River in China. It starts from the Tibetan Plateau and flows out through the country of China into the sea. To me, the most spectacular thing about it is there's a 50-story high dam called the Three Gorges Dam. It's the largest hydraulic dam in the world. It holds back more than 5 trillion gallons of water flowing from the Yangtze, which is pretty amazing. And then the fourth longest river is our Mississippi River. Its length is 2,340 miles with a very large river basin. It drains 40% of water flowing in North America. Let's see here. Oh, let's show you that. So you can see if you zoom in all the rivers that flow into the Mississippi, and this is the Mississippi River Basin, which is pretty large area there. Gives you some perspective. So the Missouri and the Mississippi join just above St. Louis. So together they're considered the longest. They are considered one river. But within the system, the Mississippi River Basin, there's lots of rivers, including the Arkansas, which is also very, very long. Dictating the flow of water is the Continental Divide. It runs along the Rocky Mountains all the way down over the Andes Mountains. It separates the watersheds, so to the right it flows to the east, and to the left it flows to the west. So there are several North American hydrological divides. Here you can see the Great Continental Divide goes along this route, and you can see the prominent snow dome here and the Triple Divide Peak, which is where 3 divides leave that area. But also there's the Great Basin, which is an endorheic basin. It's a closed basin, so water flows into it but not out of it. But the other divides, there's the Arctic or Northern Divide, which flows into the Arctic and Beaufort Sea up here. And there's the Laurentian Divide, where the water flows into the Hudson Bay. And between the Laurentian, I think that's how you say it, and the St. Lawrence and the Eastern divides, the water flows into the Atlantic. And then here's our great Mississippi region, where the water flows into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, there's multiple hydrological divides on the planet. I love looking at this one. The Continental Divide on our continent goes all the way down through South America, Central America, South America, along the Andes here and out the tip, and perhaps it continues somewhere else in one of these continents. But even Australia has a divide here. And the gray areas are the closed basins. There's the endorheics. And this is the Caspian Sea. This is the largest body of water that's inland on the planet. It's brackish. So take that in. It's pretty interesting. A river basin or drainage basin is an area of land that's drained by a river and its tributaries. The edge of the basin is known as a watershed. It's the precipitation goes into a common outlet such as a river or other body of water. That's basically it. The water flowing through the river will eventually leave the river basin through the river mouth and enter the sea or a lake. There's many drainage basins on Earth, and you can see here there's the Mississippi, the Amazon, the Nile, and the Yangtze. And these are the largest basins, and they have the longest rivers. You have to wonder what's running in this Lena Basin. It looks pretty big too, but that could be the map projection. So our continent's blessed with lots of fresh water. If you focus on this pink area here, that's the Mississippi River Basin. It flows to a very small outlet down in the Gulf of Mexico. There's 18 major river basins in North America, and within the Mississippi-Missouri River Basin, these are the sub-basins, I guess you would call them, or mini basins. Anyway, they're within the Mississippi River Basin. And here is a breakdown. We've got the Missouri River Basin here, and the upper Mississippi River Basin here, and to the east is the Ohio River Basin. And down here is the lower Mississippi River Basin, and the lower part here is the Red River Basin, and then the Arkansas White River Basin is here. And let's see if I can bring up annotate. There. Okay. Let's go over river anatomy real quick. The source is the debatable part of the beginning of a river. That's why rivers can be different lengths at different times because it can come from snowmelt or from rain or whatnot. And it's met with tributaries that contribute to the volume of water, and where they meet is called a confluence. And a river will meander through the erosion process, and carry sediment with it. And during floods, it will deposit that sediment out in the floodplains. Sometimes it'll meander and then come back on itself and create a levee, or it'll create an oxbow. An old river will be very, very curvy, where a fairly young river will be straight, but an old river can straighten itself out through leaving these oxbows and actually become straighter. So let's go over some river terminology. Alluvium is the particles that result from erosion. It's made of silt and clay and gravel and sand, and it's deposited in what they call an alluvial fan, you can see here, and that's deposited into an alluvial plain. And that can be a very thick lithological unit there that can grow over time. A delta is a region where the water spreads out and deposits sediment. I put it here because that's the shape of the Greek letter, the delta. And you can see here the sediment actually fanning out and creating that delta. And see if I can get this to advance here. So floodplains slow floodwaters. As the water rises, the alluvium, or the erosional material flowing with the river, is deposited, and it creates really rich soil. As the river recedes, it replenishes groundwater, and it also is filtered to the sediment, which improves the water quality. The Mississippi Delta is 200 miles long and 87 miles wide. It's got seven lobes, 3, 4, 5, 7 lobes. And these are created as the river meanders and changes course over time. You can see that some are very wide and some are not, but it's made a very large area. The alluvial floodplain here is up to 350 feet thick. It's 6 delta lobes. The Missouri River flows from 14,000 feet in Colorado down to 400 feet. The Yellowstone, Platte, and Missouri combined before joining the Mississippi. There's 15 dams along the river with hundreds more on the tributaries. And the Continental Divide forms the western border of the Missouri watershed. The Mississippi, Mississippi, drains about 41% of the country's rivers. It drains 32 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces. It is one of the greatest commercial waterways on Earth. We depend on it. Combined, the Mississippi-Missouri River dominate this basin, and dominating it was a great challenge and is a great challenge. there's some history involved with rivers that we'll go over here. In April of 26, the Army Corps of Engineers finished construction of the Mississippi levees from Cairo to Illinois. And I should say they didn't actually finish them, they improved them. They started out small and they made them bigger. I think they started in the 1700s. Anyway, they publicly declared that the levee system along the Mississippi would prevent future floods. But then there was the Great Flood of 1927, which is historic. It started with the levee collapse near Cairo, Illinois. There was a 1,200-foot levee that completely collapsed. And then there was the Mounds levee, which is the most famous, and it collapsed. It was the biggest levee failure in U.S. history. And there's a book about it because the entire levee system failed. So there's a book about it by John Barry. It's called The Great Flood. And it's an interesting read. It's a bit of a textbook at times, but it's got a lot about the engineers and that wanted to build the levees and try and tame the river. But I'll read you just a part of it. There's no sight like the rising Mississippi. Watching it rise against its levees, it grows darker, angrier, and dirtier. Eddies and whirlpools erupt on its surface. It thickens with trees, rooftops, and the occasional body of a mule. Its currents roil more, now swifter, and pummels the banks harder. When a section of river caves into the river, acres of land at a time collapse, snapping trees with great cracking sounds of heavy artillery. On the water, the sound carries for miles. The river has no weakness. It makes no mistakes. It's perfect. It will find and exploit any weakness. To repel it requires an intense, nearly perfect, and sustained effort. That was his observation during the flood. The spring snowmelt, then extreme rain in the summer of 26 through the summer of 27 pummeled the area. All the rivers and the tributaries within the system were full. There's 145 levees that broke and 13 major crevasses. It was, the monetary damage was $1 trillion, equivalent to $1 trillion today. This is the Mississippi River down here. It's held back by sandbags. This is in Memphis, and you can see how high it was. It was also 60 miles wide, if you can imagine. It was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. The Mounds levee breach occurred in April of 27. 3 million cubic feet flowed. 5 weeks later, the waves were 12 feet high and the water was 100 feet deep. The crevasse was 3/4 of a mile wide. So you can see these men trying to sandbag the Mounds levee. They were actually working at gunpoint. You can see the fellows up here. These were what used to be sharecroppers that were forced into manual labor because there were no farms to work. So that was quite controversial. Floods devastated Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. In fact, everybody was impacted. On January 23rd, the Ohio River flooded and the crest took 29 days to reach New Orleans. 5 days later, it took 38 days, so the river was filling up. Much of Arkansas was underwater for over 153 days. The Mississippi backed up into the Arkansas, St. Francis, and White Rivers. If you go to Bull Shoals State Park, there's a big write-up about the flood. The White River rose 100 feet, and it talks about some of that. I can't imagine 100 feet. The White and Little Red, they were all tamed somewhat by levees, and they all broke. So there was 100,000 acres with 9 to 16 feet of water on them. Here's a short film by the PBS. It's a silent film that was filmed during that flood event, and you'll get to see a little bit of what it looked like. Here you can see the flooding along the Arkansas River. This is Little Rock. It's hard to imagine. The rivers turned to waves of mud and debris and destroyed everything in their path. And men worked day and night trying to sandbag the levees. You can see the waves, how torrential it was. I can't imagine why the houses didn't sweep away there. It seems like they would have. But people got up on the rooftops and up in trees trying to save themselves. And a really cold front came through, bringing more rain. And so some people started to die of exposure. Here's the sandbagging. You can see that the actual levee falls into the water. It just eats away at it. So any boat in the area was immediately pressed into service, and there weren't many motorboats, but they were best for the job. But they were extremely rare. The rescue workers were working. Oh, here's Little Rock here. That's a really good one. You can see the boardwalks and people wading through it. So here's what was going on. It got really, really cold, and these boaters came in and tried to save what they could, but rowboats weren't the best thing. So Arkansas had a secret weapon. It was the bootleggers. They came down from Arkansas with the fastest and most powerful boats and joined the effort to save the lives. It was 36 hours of sheer terror, and order was not easy to maintain because people tried to get on the boats that were full, and they were afraid they would capsize, so they had to be kept off with by gunpoint. Hoover was the Secretary of the Interior. He gained a lot of notoriety because of the perception that he helped, but he really didn't. He just came and did the photo op. This is in the day where the federal government really didn't help states. They were pretty much on their own. Food was brought in by the Red Cross and donated, but the African Americans were forced to purchase it. And if there was any given to them, it was the food that was left over. In tent cities built along the levees, people were getting dropped off by boat onto these levees. So it gives you an idea of the impact. And here's some of the pictures from that time. You can see the boats are full of people, particularly along here. That's packed. And the animals, there's one that looks pretty hungry. And then here's some of the levees being eaten away. It's pretty massive. This is the Arkansas River here. This is the Bering Cross Bridge, which is for trains. They loaded up a train full of coal and put it out here to try and hold the bridge in place, but the train and the bridge washed away. Here's Jonesboro. So this really did impact much of Arkansas, most of Arkansas back in 1927. So the 1927 flood changed the course of history. There's a cause and effect. Herbert Hoover was in the national spotlight and ended up being the U.S. president. We have the Flood Control Act of 1928. It put Arkansas into the Great Depression early and contributed to the great migration of African Americans to the Midwest and the North, primarily Chicago, which brought the blues up to Chicago, and we got the Chicago blues. It mechanized corporate farming and replaced Black American labor. And African Americans shifted from Republican to Democrat at this time. And in 1930, when many were still recovering, the same rich land turned into dust and blew away. So one of the outcrops of the flooding was the Rural Electrification Act of 1930, which occurred because of all the dams that were built because of the floods. So let's talk a little bit or watch a little bit about that here.
The power that we generate here from the plant here at Fort Gibson and also the other plants in the Tulsa district are delivered through the Southwestern Power Administration through fixed contracts that they have with preferred customers. And that all goes back to the Rural Electrification Act that was passed back in the 30s that identified those nonprofit entities as preferred customers for federal power.
Not until 1936 that electric cooperatives came to be through the REA. Prior to that, people who lived in rural areas of Oklahoma or anywhere in the country were not going to get electric service because the investor-owned utilities couldn't make a profit. They were not going to go serve those areas. So it was not until 1936 that the electric cooperative program began. And so at that point in time, co-ops all across the country were created, were formed. The federal government provided the business model and the capital to get these electric cooperatives started. So through a period of 10 to 15 years, a lot of infrastructure was built in rural America to finally bring electricity to rural consumers who were probably 30 years after the urban areas had electricity. So it was quite a long delay in getting those services. In the late 30s and the early 40s is when there were a lot of flood control acts passed, which built these flood control dams that the Corps manages. And while we were building infrastructure out in these rural areas, we didn't have a lot of sources of power at that time. So the decision was made when these dams were built, put these hydro units in place. Those hydro units and the power they generated was dedicated to rural electric cooperatives who needed a source of power and also public power municipal systems. And so that's where the relationship and the connection with federal hydropower and the electric cooperatives began. And it's been that way ever since. And that hydropower is a very important piece of our portfolio. It's low cost. The consumers, the rural electric and the public power consumers of that hydropower do pay for that power. They pay all the costs associated with generating, with maintaining those units. But it's an important piece of our portfolio because it's affordable. Rural electric cooperatives serve in all 77 counties of Oklahoma. We have more miles of infrastructure in line than the investor-owned and public power combined. We'll average about 7 meters per mile, where an investor-owned would be between 30 and 40 meters per mile, and a municipal 60 plus. So we have a high infrastructure cost and not a lot of members to spread that over. So having a piece of our power supply be affordable hydro is very important in our ability to keep electric rates affordable to rural consumers.
That was good vision by people back then to say we need to do this because they recognized the importance of electrifying the nation for productivity and for security reasons as well. So that was a very beneficial thing that happened way back then, and that comes as a responsibility to us now to make sure that we operate and maintain these plants so that they are reliable and can provide that power to our customers when they need it.
I'm not sure what those tools were. Maybe they're the historical tools that were used to build it. I'm not sure. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that. I want to briefly cover levees and dams and how they operate. This is a levee, and levees are, a lock and dam, and these are on rivers. We have them on the Arkansas River, and we have them along the Mississippi. Whoops. Let's see if I can get that to go. So you can see here the upper gates open and the lower gates open, and the water is brought in so that it's the same level as the river. This is like an elevator system for boats. And then that all closes up, and then the lower gates open. The filling valves are open to allow the water to enter, and then the emptying valves make the chamber the same height as the lower pool. No pumps are used, and the chamber is operated solely on gravity. It's pretty neat. And we've got quite a few of them around us. There it goes. So the Mississippi has locks and dams all throughout it. You can see here a map of those. Most of the 29 locks and dams were built in the 30s. So the first lock is up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the last one is in Granite City, Illinois. It's a drop of about 420 feet. So that makes the ride a little bit smoother for these big vessels. The evolution of levees is illustrated here. You can see how a river can overpower a levee. It can pipe through it, it can scour it, it can saturate it, or it can go into an under seepage type event. But through time, they've improved them. This is one of the smallest levees from 1844. And in 1914, we had levees about here, and then we built them all the way up to here. They've done a lot of things to improve the levees, such as adding cement and landslide berms and drainage trenches, drainage baskets, and relief wells. 1,000 miles of concrete has been poured to prevent the levee system from eroding. And here's a short video on how a dam operates. Oh, and make note here, here's the generator cutaway, so keep that in mind as you watch this. It's very important.
Hydroelectric power is generated using the force of falling water. Water is held behind a dam, forming an artificial lake or reservoir. When electricity is needed, some of the water in the reservoir is released through a water intake in the dam. Gravity causes the water to fall through a pipe inside the dam called a penstock. The falling water spins a turbine, a type of water wheel that converts the water's energy into mechanical power, which is located at the end of the penstock. When the turbine spins, it turns a metal shaft which goes up to an electrical generator. As the shaft turns, it causes the generator to rotate, producing electricity. After flowing through the penstock and across the turbine, the water continues into the river on the other side of the dam. Hydroelectric power is a renewable source of energy. It's also one of the most cost-reliable forms of electric production.
What? So do you want to make a note? The water that's coming out, this is the tail water here. And that puppy dog likes it. And that water is cold because it's coming out from the lower part of the lake. So the native fish don't generally do very well in that cold water, but the trout do. And a lot of our rivers have trout, and that is why. Also, if you'll note the scale, here's a little guy here, and you can see how big he is compared to the generator and turbines and whatnot. Dams aren't just about hydropower, though. They have to account for fisheries and wildlife and recreation, not just on the reservoir and lake, but also along the river. The reservoirs also provide drinking water, and also, finally, it has to provide flood control. So when it rains a lot, the lake may fill up, and you don't want it to overtop the dam because that's a reason for a dam to fail. But you may have to open your floodgates, which are, they didn't mention that, but they're right in this area here. And I don't know if you can see that, but right in here, those floodgates are called tainter gates. The man in France named Tainter invented them. Trivia, that'll be on the test. Anyway, they'll open all those gates up and they'll run all the generators and let all that water out before they'll let the lake overtop. But if it's raining a lot, the downstream folks might still get flooding because really no system is perfect. So you do have some side effects at certain times. There's also threats to the system. Levees, dams, and canals and whatnot connect the river and surrounding wetlands, but they sever it, and nutrients are no longer deposited in the floodplains. About 3,000 North American acres are lost per year as a result of compaction and subsidence, hurricanes and tidal erosion, sea level rise, and human activity. So we don't let the river do its natural thing anymore. We don't allow the wetlands to be replenished. So you can see here the sediment plumes from the Mississippi. By the way, there's fertilizer that gets washed out here in the Gulf from the Mississippi and the tributaries, which creates some dead zones. But back during the 1927 flood, that was more sewage. So we just changed one poison to another, I guess. So let's go down to the Arkansas River now. It's the primary river in the Arkansas White Red River Basin, which is part of the Missouri-Mississippi River system. So the river starts in Colorado. It has three faces. It's a wild mountain stream full of rapids in Colorado, and you can see the picture there is in Gunnison up in Colorado. It's a braided prairie river along the old Santa Fe Trail through Kansas, and it's a significant river in Oklahoma and Arkansas where there's locks and dams and levees built to control it and allow commercial traffic to flow. Much like the Mississippi, the Arkansas has a series of dams and locks and dams called the Kerr-McClellan Navigation System, named after a couple of congressmen who proposed it and got the funding for it. Back in 1964, it was built. It keeps the river at a constant flow so that we have commerce and transport and flood control. But this, as I said, nothing's ever perfect. In 2019, there was 2.5 million cubic yards of sediment that was deposited into the river during the flood then. So not until May of 2020, after dredging, was commercial traffic flowing freely again. But you can see a before and after. This is before the locks and dams, and this is after, so you have a fairly constant flow of water during normal periods of rain or even drought. So here's a map of the Kerr-McClellan system. You can see the little lines here, the locks along the river, and then up here we have two dams. We have the Kaw Dam and the Keystone Dam. The Keystone's near Tulsa and the Kaw's near Ponca City, Oklahoma. So they dam up the river up there, and then the Arkansas River flows through locks and dams the remainder of the way. And you can see the relationship of the Arkansas River down here in this map to the Mississippi system. I don't know why I highlighted the one at Toadsuck, other than I just love the name Toadsuck. Good place. Levees along the Arkansas River, there's 42 levees. A couple of them have been breached during periods of heavy rain. They're maintained by the Levee Board District, but constructed by the Corps of Engineers. I think the Corps inspects them periodically, but it's mainly up to the Levee Board districts, and even in some cases, private individuals. You can see the crevasse here from the 2019 rains. So the Keystone Dam near Tulsa, Oklahoma was built in 1968. It has 2 generators and 18 floodgates. It's 4,600 feet long and 120 feet wide, or high, I mean. It also, during the spring of 2019, almost overtopped. It went above top of flood level here. And so all the gates had to be opened. And you can see that picture here. The Tainer gates are flowing and the generators were flowing. So there's quite a bit of water flowing into the Arkansas River. The Kaw Dam is located near Ponca City, Oklahoma. It was completed in 1976. It's 121 feet above stream bed, and it has 8 floodgates. There was also a slipstream nozzle installed in 1995 to increase the dissolved oxygen levels in the water, which is for the fisheries health. You'll learn more about that in Stream Team, or you can just ask Bob. And again, in May of 2019, the Kaw Reservoir rose to 11 feet below the top of the dam. So the floodgates were opened and the generators were running. You can see here. It was pretty much an emergency. It was pretty critical that we didn't let those dams overtop, or it could have been really catastrophic. So here's a map of the Arkansas River during the floods of 2019. You can see the projected levels were pretty high 45 feet was the projected stage here in Dardanelle, and the record level was 44 feet. Let's see, I think there was another one that got above record. Yeah, here it is in Toadstock, 285 feet was projected for June 1st, and the record was 282 feet. So it's pretty significant rainfall, and I think Fort Smith was hit pretty hard, but also Oklahoma was hit pretty hard. Rainfall as of 2019 was up 245% than normal. So they really had a problem, and the Arkansas River really got full. But every region of the state was up triple digits in the percent increase over normal, and was increasing. It was a pretty significant rain. You can see here the Mississippi River Basin is beginning to fill. Once the Mississippi is full, the tributaries will back up. If you've ever been like in a hurricane like I have been, the storm surge will also cause the rivers to flow backwards, just as this did here, especially along the Arkansas down here near Pine Bluff. So weeks later, you can see that the entire system, if you compare, the entire system began to fill up in 2019. So the whole basin was filling up with water. Meanwhile, back to the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide acts like an atmospheric dam. It forces hot air from the south and the cold air from the north to pool up over the plains. And this causes variations in seasonal weather that can generate humongous storms. During the winter and spring, the atmospheric expressway formed by the plains may create fast-moving weather. It can create fast rates of decreasing atmospheric pressure. This causes Nebraska and surrounding states to have large fluctuations in warm and cold weather, especially in the spring. And this was the case in 2019. The flooding there from the rain lasted for months in the Missouri Valley, which is over in here. It even destroyed a dam along the Nebraska-South Dakota border. It was called the Spencer Dam, and the Niobrara River was frozen 24 inches thick. With the heavy rainfall, it had nowhere to go, so the dam began to overtop. Water increased to 40,000 cubic feet per second, and the dam collapsed, and there were 3-ton ice chunks forced down the river. You can see the map right in here. The Niobrara is here. So as the basin was filling up, the tributaries were filling up, and then this particular one impacted everything even more. So let's take a look at that. This is the Spencer Dam collapse of 2019. So the ground was frozen, and so the runoff just swelled the river. It couldn't be absorbed. And ice in the river floated to the surface in large blocks and were carried downstream by the flood. There was these thousands of blocks, some of them weighed 20 tons. So these ice blocks piled up, forming ice jams, which backed up the floodwater even more. You can see the river actually changed course here. It washed away. Here's a road that got washed away. Roadways, bridges, everything in its way got washed off. Those are huge chunks of ice. You get a bit of scale here. You can see the people. Back in the back there, you can see the dam, what's left of it. So the entire landscape was scoured. Trees, everything in its path got torn up. The remains of the Spencer Dam was a skeleton of concrete and steel amidst a sea of sand. It became one of the iconic images of the March 2019 bomb cyclone flood that caused billions of dollars in damage across Nebraska and took 4 lives. Here you can get a close-up of the dam. So all these events played together in what ended up being a very serious flood event. in 2019. You can see here how the river changed course and went around the dam after it just ripped it apart. We'll zoom in here. There used to be tainer gates or floodgates, and those are gone. There's a few pieces of structure left, and then this side of it got ripped apart. This is the housing where people actually worked, what's left of it. It's really unbelievable to see something like this happen. There's probably more video out there on YouTube if you want to do the research. It's the Spencer Dam collapse of 2019. And you can see here's the housing where people actually worked. Most of that's ripped away. There is one tainer gate left. Thankfully, I think they knew this was coming, and the people that were working there evacuated, and the people downstream evacuated, minus one person who refused to do so, and he was never seen again or found. Okay. So the estimated precipitation between January and May of 2019, you can see here, the white area is 32 plus inches. And the purple here, which is down in this area, is 40 plus inches. Even so, 18 to 24 inches and 12 to 18 inches is quite a bit of rain. So the lower Mississippi Basin rainfall in 2019 competed with some of the records that were from 1927. And you can see that here. Cairo, Illinois, 120. It beat the 1927 record. Natchez, Mississippi, 154, beat the record in 27. Louisiana here at Red River Landing, 162. It was 152 in 27, and Baton Rouge, 153 versus 135. But, you know, that all this was still pretty substantial if you think about how much rain fell at that time. So here's a video of the levee breach at Lake Dardanelle from 2019. This is what 343,000 plus cubic feet per second looks like. I suppose they used a drone. I don't see any downdraft from a helicopter. So I'm thinking that's what was done here. And to give you a real feel, turn up your sound. This is what 343 cubic feet per second feels like. That's the Dardanelle Lock and Dam. It's pretty significant. Wouldn't want to be in that water. So there's several types of floods. There's ice dam lakes and glaciers. There's basin breaches that overtop. There's melting and debris dams and breached landslide dams, and snow and rain flooding, and then ice jams. So up here in the upper right is Connecticut. It's an ice jam. And down here in the lower left, I won't say it right, is the Usoi Dam in Tajikistan. It's close. It is formed, you can see here that the dam it was formed by a landslide in 1911. That's Lake Suez. And that resulted in 5 million people moving in downstream from it. So if that thing ever fails, that'll be pretty bad. The most catastrophic floods in history start with the Jonestown one in 1889, which 60 million tons of water flowed because of a dam collapse. 2,200 people died. And the Yangtze River flood in 1931 was from heavy snowmelt and 7 cyclonic storms. That was 3.7 million people died there. Then in 1362, the Great Drowning in the Netherlands. The cause was from the North Sea rising and overtopping the dike. And the Indus River Valley in Pakistan in 1841 was caused by an earthquake, which broke a natural dam, and they don't know how many people died. And then the Great Flood of 1927 in USA. So water is, we think we can control it, but we really can't. Here's the Yangtze River Three Gorges Dam. It's significant. It's huge. It's just huge. We talked about that earlier. And so the 100-year and the 500-year floods are based on probability. A 100-year flood is a 1 in 100 chance of flooding in a given year. And a 500-year flood is 1 in 500 chance of flooding in a given year. Houston experienced its 500-year flood in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2019, and probably 2022 will happen again. So to take it back to perspective, the world's water, the total water is, free-flowing water is here, fresh water is here, and rivers and lakes are here. So that little tiny dot has a big impact on our lives. It's changed the course of history. It's affected how we live, and it affects us how we play. It creates rivers create floodplains, terraces, deltas, and alluvial fans. And if you, rivers need us just like we need them, and if you want to investigate a little further, there's river keepers and water keepers. The goal is to have swimmable, drinkable, and fishable water everywhere. There's a national river cleanup day that we maybe could participate in with kayaks and canoes. There's a lot of volunteers. There's also the Ouachita River Keepers and the White River Water Keepers. And I've not really investigated those groups, but if you want to look further, there's some things to check out. There's also in provalenslearning.com a Wild and Scenic River course of study, which I took and found very interesting. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is an effort to balance the dammed up part of rivers with free-flowing conditions and water quality in wild rivers. It's a really good course. And here's a picture of our own Buffalo River, which is a wild and scenic river in one small part. And I believe the Mulberry River is also a wild and scenic river in Arkansas. With that, I will leave it back to Margaret and hope you learned something, and there really isn't a test. I fooled you.